Good morning and welcome to the Community of Practice on Autism Spectrum Disorders and Other Developmental Disabilities. Today we are talking adult transition, self-advocacy, communication. I am really excited with the lineup we have. My name's Tim Markle. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Community of Practice on Autism Spectrum Disorder and Developmental Disabilities. We have a number of co-chairs. Tracy is a co-chair. We also have connections to the education system with Katie Berg. And then Colleen McCluskey is a self-advocate who is also part of our core team. Those, sorry, part of our co-chair team. The co-chairs then meet with our growing core team to plan out what is going to be the focus of the events and the gatherings of the next year for the community of practice. Is we try to remain very much focused on whatever the community is looking to learn more about. We are here to share together, learn together, and make change together. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to one of the members of the planning team. Each group also has a separate planning team, and Eric has been leading the planning team for this one. So I'm going to turn it on over to Eric and welcome and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, and welcome everybody to our community of practice entitled Adult Transition, Self-Advocacy, and Communication. My name is Eric Lynn Miller. I'm a social worker by training, but I've been mostly a bureaucrat probably the last 15 years, working in the disability community in Dane County and Madison area. And when I joined the COP and the planning committee a couple years ago, I think it was, I really liked the idea of how it brought people together from around the state to really just share, the practices and the best practices that are going out there. And so with that in mind, I raised my hand for this planning committee, and the group that assembled wanted to talk mostly about transition. It's such an important part of everybody's life, going from school age years into that adulthood. And as we talked about that topic, we really kind of came to that conclusion. There's a ton of resources out there. There's probably more resources than people actually need in some regards around transition, but the outcomes are always questionable, maybe not what people thought they would be. And so this community of practice idea kind of came around with sharing stories of people that have gone through transition, people that have worked with others going through transition, and just to share some reflections, knowledge, lessons learned from those stories. And so we are very excited to share those stories and those resources, lessons learned with you all today. Our format is going to begin with two self-advocates, James and Aaron, and each of them will be sharing their experiences with adult transition. After we hear their presentations, we'll take a short break, and then we'll move into our panel portion. Our panel consists of parents, professionals, advocates for people with disabilities in the autistic community. Lastly, I just want to let folks know as speakers are talking and as questions and ideas, reflections are formulating in your head, please jot those down or try to remember them. We will come back at the end of the community of practice to have a question and answer period. But we've decided with this format that we're just going to have presenters sort of go through their presentations, and then we'll come back at the end for questions and answers. So with that, I would like to get ready to pass it over to James Williams and his presentation entitled Utilizing High School Booster Clubs During Post-Secondary Transition, a Case Study. James is joining us from Seattle, Washington this morning. And I also just want to let folks know that we didn't get a chance to do a dry run. So between James in Seattle, Tracy in Milwaukee, a couple of us in South Central Wisconsin, we'll do our best to keep it flowing well. And so, James, I'll turn it over to you, and you have about 30 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Eric. So yes, I'm actually here from Seattle, Washington. And what's happening in Seattle is a big international autism conference that is held in a different country each year called INSAR. And INSAR is the International Society for Autism Research. And this conference basically features scientists and researchers studying autism from all over the world. And what I really enjoy about this conference is that there are things from different countries that people are researching to further and improve the autism community. And there are countries that are studying things that we in America are not necessarily paying attention to. So I often tell people that coming to INSAR is like being in a time machine. But enough about that. So today I'm going to be talking about the transition process, but from a lens that is not the conventional lens that we think about with transition. Usually when we think about transition, we think about, what's the functioning ability of the autistic person? What skills do they have? Uh, what supports are they going to need? Are they going to be able to go to higher education? Are they going to be able to go to work, or are they going to still be living at home? And we think in terms of the outcome based on the abilities of the person. But today I'm not going to be talking about that. I'm going to be talking about a resource that I unexpectedly discovered after my transition process that really worked for me, that I personally believe that could work for other autistic adults and people as well during transition. And to start off this resource, I'm just going to tell everybody right now. I'm sure, here in Wisconsin, and in so many places, a lot of people are fans of a sports team. Here in Wisconsin, of course, a lot of people are Green Bay Packers fans. Supporting the Green Bay Packers, watching their football games during football season is a big part of Wisconsin culture. And many of us, maybe a lot of us, if you have kids that go to middle or high school, most middle or high schools have athletic teams that a lot of people support. A big part of our culture is going to high school football games or basketball games. And so basically there's a large part of a lot of communities, and their identity is supporting sports. And one of the things that I concluded when I was in high school when I finished high school is that, my high school has athletic teams people that athletic teams that people support. And I realized that, okay, I've aged out of education, and I actually fought and used my legal right to stay in school till my 22nd birthday. I graduated with a modified diploma in 2010, right before my 22nd birthday. And like it said here, since 2006, although it says here I've traveled to Minnesota for resources that don't exist in my home state, I've also done the same for Wisconsin. These slides were actually recycled from a presentation I did in Minnesota because my computer was hacked a few weeks ago, and these were the slides that had been saved and backed up. So, but what it should say is I've traveled to Minnesota and Wisconsin since 2006 for these events. Now, after I aged out of special education, some limitations were basically thrust on me. I didn't have the academic prerequisites to go to college, in part because of some real learning disabilities, and my diploma was modified. It's a high school diploma, but I didn't meet the academic requirements for college, even though I'd worked hard to meet certain requirements until I realized, I have these learning disabilities, and I never got to certain subjects at the college level. In addition, I also had some limitations with independent living skills and realized that although I travel independently, I still struggled with living independently and still legally live at home with my family. So basically, I found myself in my hometown where most of my peers were going to college and going off to start families and live on their own, and here I was still in my hometown. And then I look back at the fact that I supported a lot of athletic teams while I was a high school student in order to protect myself and make friends. And at the end of the day, although I aged out of special education and education services, I still hadn't aged out of supporting the athletic teams in my high school. I also think of the ironic fact that although you would think I'm wearing this gold shirt to support the Green Bay Packers, the colors of my high school are actually the same colors, the Green Bay Packers, gold and green and gold. And so I'm actually wearing this to showcase my formal outfit I wear when I'm supporting athletics at Glenbrook North High School. So Glenbrook North High School is the school that I went to in Northbrook, Illinois, that I graduated with that modified diploma in. And because I had supported athletic teams as a student, as a way of making friends and building a community, when that limitation, those limitations emerged in adulthood, despite what I'd accomplished, I realized, okay, well, if I'm still living at home and still remaining in Northbrook, Illinois, I can keep supporting athletics. And so that's what I did. And it actually was a seamless transition because when I was a senior, I ended up becoming a big brother figure to a group of freshman athletes who I supported their events. And so after I graduated, I just continued supporting those freshman athletes throughout their high school athletic careers. And so what happened was I became known by the school as this autistic alumni supporter who spent his free time at the school supporting all these athletic teams, not just football and basketball, that don't get a lot of spectators, and athletes who usually would only be supported by their parents were really thought it was cool that, someone who was not a family member was actually watching and supporting their sports. And so I was welcomed with open arms by Glenbrook North, and finally the Booster Club, the official parent parent fundraising group that helps raise extra funds for the athletic teams. They approached me 5 years after I graduated, after I'd already established myself as this supporter, and said, you come to so many sporting events, you support our athletes, you support our kids, and we as parents, we're part of this club called the Booster Club, and our goal is to help raise funds, support these athletes. And you've been such a loyal supporter. Normally, our organization is only parents, but there's no rule saying that we can't have community members in our organization. So how would you like to become a member of the Booster Club? And so in 2015, I was formally welcomed to join the Booster Club, and in the 2015-26 school year, I basically was I paid the admission fee and was fully welcomed as one of the club's newest members. One other reason too, like this says too, is this also was the culmination of the fact that I never really was athletic myself. I really never was necessarily into sports growing up, but I had a lot of struggles, fitting in when I was in high school and desperate to find help. There also was a conflict in that the teachers were not giving me the proper social supports. They were telling me social expectations that turned out to not be the social expectations and unspoken rules that the Glenbrook North kids were expecting. And then I luckily found this really kind group of athletes from different teams that were willing to sit me down and teach me what the rules were. At first, it was a group of kind girls that were either swimmers or former swimmers from the swim team. But also it included a group of girls from the basketball team and then also a girl from the cheerleading squad. And so these athletes basically took me in and they taught me these rules that I needed in order to fit in. And I'm like, okay, how do I repay you? Are your parents going to be okay with us being friends? And the athletes said pretty clear, become our fan, support our sports, and everyone will love you. And that's exactly what happened. Plus, a lot of the kids that were making fun of me and causing me trouble had no school spirit at all. They weren't even going to football games. So I realized that by going to the athletic events as a student, not only was I repaying my friends, I was able to stay safe. because the bad kids that were going to cause me trouble, guess what? They weren't going to those events. Next slide, please. So when I became a member of the Booster Club, I didn't just, passively sit there and just build a community. I became a very active, prominent volunteer at the Booster Club, helping out with mostly parent members and often being called in as an extra hand when the Booster Club could not find enough parents to meet the responsibilities and the duties of various volunteer-run things the Booster Club's responsible for, predominantly concession stands at sporting events. So when I became a member, I was immediately given responsibilities. And to this day, I volunteer at concession stands. At athletic events, I assist with the sales of Glenbrook North spirit wear. And there's events where I promote the Booster Club. I basically say to parents, hey, sports teams need extra funding beyond what tax dollars can give. Please join our club, pay that membership fee, and help support our athletes. And I also participate in regularly scheduled meetings, although the meeting structure has changed in my 9-year tenure of the Booster Club. I go to meetings where I often will work with the Booster Club board and other leadership figures as to what my responsibilities are going to be, and to accommodate them with my still busy travel schedule as an autism advocate. Now, in addition, because the Booster Club is a school-sanctioned organization, I make sure, because I'm not a parent and don't always get certain memos and news flashes that other parents get, I work with the security staff at Glenbrook North to make sure that I'm complying with all the policies and procedures. And the security staff has been amazing at Glenbrook North. They've been really amazing in making sure that whatever policy changes occur, they will let me know, because they know I don't always get the news feeds that parents do regarding what the policy changes may be. Next slide. So basically, being a member of Glenbrook North High School's Booster Club, it's enabled me to build this amazing social community as an autistic adult in my hometown. And one of the things that I learned through this is that booster clubs aren't unique to Glenbrook North. A lot of high schools have booster clubs that do exactly what the Booster Club at Glenbrook North is doing. They maintain concession stands. They sell concessions of sports, spirit wear, and often need extra help. And basically what the Booster Club basically realized was that here I was, an autistic adult looking for a community that had the free time, was still around, and that I could actually be valuable back at my old high school. And then instead of, just being told, hey, you've aged out of education, move on, my high school saw how I was helping the Booster Club, and they welcomed me back. And now I'm a respected member of the community, respected member of my hometown, helping out at athletic events. And there are teachers who still remember me when I was a student, who have thanked me for my service at my old high school. So as a complete opposite to so many schools that just want to throw autistic kids off the cliff after they graduate, I found a way to stay connected at my high school through the Booster Club. I discovered that the Booster Club at my high school was a resource to help me with the transition process. And I realized that since booster clubs exist for the similar purpose that my booster club at my school exists, other booster clubs can do what the Booster Club at Glenbrook North did for me. There is nothing specific about Glenbrook North High School's Booster Club and what that club did for me. Most high schools have booster clubs and athletic teams that people can legally support. And I just want to spread the word and basically say, look, your high school might have a booster club, and guess what? That booster club might be an amazing resource for autistic high school kids after they transition out of high school. the autistic alumni in your schools, they might be able to become great volunteers in their booster clubs as well. The booster club helped me and showed me a lesser known but appropriate way to stay connected in my high school and build a community. The booster club can do the same for countless autistic high school kids. And I will now leave the rest of my time for any questions anyone might have. Next slide. Do we have any questions? Anyone want to write anything in the chat?
I was going to suggest, yeah, since James is in Seattle and he does need to go to another presentation, he won't be back. So thanks, James, for mentioning that. If people do have questions for James, this would be a great time to ask him.
Actually,
Because
correction, Eric, that was I thought that,
okay.
but I actually will be here for the entirety of the meeting only
Oh, cool.
because the convention of the venue accommodated me, and I have found a place to be here for the entire meeting.
Oh, awesome.
That was just really, because I'd never been to Seattle before. I didn't know what was going to work, and then I made perfect arrangements. Plus, the presentation that I'm doing here in Seattle, there's actually a 2.5 hour gap between it, and I already pre-prepared everything. So I will be here the entirety of the session. But I wanted to use some of still my allotted time to answer questions anyone might have.
Go for
So
it.
do you
Yes.
have any questions? I have about 10 minutes.
I have a question, James. Before I ask my question, I actually just have a comment. As a mom to a child on the spectrum, as well as a mom to a student athlete, hearing your story is really inspiring and really cool, and it gives me excitement. I would love to think my little guy is young yet, but I would love for him to have an experience similar to what you found. So thank you for sharing that. You've given me lots of ideas and ways that I hope to maybe be able to help him connect with things. But I guess that's where my question comes from. You kind of talked about the school approaching you because they notice this. What advice would you have for a young adult or a parent or a caregiver if the school maybe isn't approaching or offering that opportunity? What advice would you give to help connect those folks to those resources?
What I would basically say is, obviously different schools are going to have different policies, and when I support athletics at away events, I learn about how policies differ between different schools' booster clubs. First, if your school has athletic teams and those events are open to the public, just go to the events and also learn about the different cultures of the sport. See, one thing that my high school also had was, although of course, it had the stereotypical football teams and cheerleading squads and popular boys basketball teams, it also had long time established traditions of other sports that weren't as popular, of being socially inclusive sports. And in fact, one reason why a lot of swimmers from the swim team took me in is because at Glenbrook North High School, the swim teams, the cross country teams, and the track and field teams were traditionally socially inclusive and autism inclusive sports. So it was very common for students with autism to join those teams, even if they couldn't even participate, even if they couldn't even swim properly or even run, because those teams, they were no cut. So anyone was welcome on them, even if they really weren't an asset to the team. And so there were kids who during track and field would walk every event. Kids during cross country would walk every event. Kids in the swim team who couldn't swim that fast would lose every race. But they were on those teams because they had a social community, because they were accepted by their teammates. And what was even cooler was in cross country at Glenbrook North, although the boys and girls cross country teams competed separately, they would always compete at the same meets. The meets were co-ed, and there'd be a boys race and a girls race. So there was a lot of acceptance between the boys and girls of the cross country teams. And so you had all this autism acceptance in these teams that kids were told by their coaches. And so I would go to these games and just support all these kids that were losing every race, but they were autistic and they were happy someone was supporting them. So what I tell is, look at the traditions of inclusion in sports that might be at your school. And then if your school's got a booster club, what are the rules of that club? Is that club open to alumni or community members? You don't have to wait for the booster club to come to you. If the club legally says you can be a part of that, you can join. Most clubs have a membership fee, but you know what? The fee that I paid for it was worth every penny of the community I got for it. And now that I'm such an active volunteer, the booster club sometimes even waives that annual fee because they know how important it is to me, and they know how important and because the work I do has routinely been very influential and beneficial, and the booster club sometimes relies on me to help out at certain events. But although I was lucky that the booster club approached me, if you've got a club that says membership's open to any community member or sports supporter, you don't have to wait. Just join. And then follow the lead of what membership entails. Many at Glenbrook North, sometimes some of the sporting events, the booster club would have representatives that would talk about the club. Find an event where the booster club's promoting themselves. Or maybe if your school's concession stands are run by the booster club, go to the concession stand when there isn't a big line or a spirit world. Ask them about what goes on in the booster club. Find out if the booster club can be a resource and a social community for those autistic children. Do that homework, because if they're open to the community, that means autistic people too.
Thank you, James. I see Nancy has her hand up. If you'd like to unmute Nancy.
Yes, Nancy?
There, okay, got it. James, that was a really great presentation. I had never heard you talk about that before. The question I have is, how did you identify who were kind people because it's somewhat hard for autistic people in social environments to know who has good intentions and who does not? How did you identify those people? And did those people help protect you from the bullies that have been driving you crazy before that?
First, I can tell you, yes, those people protected me big time. What actually happened was, due to a series of various unrelated events, I was lucky to have been able to access those individuals. What happened, it all started, two things resulted in actually meeting the two people who gave me the most help. My father, growing up, had a tradition. Every Friday night, we would go swimming at the local YMCA. And we often got to know the lifeguards at the local YMCA pool, because this was our weekly tradition. Every Friday, my father would take me and my siblings to the YMCA for swimming and to go swimming. And eventually this one lifeguard during the Friday shift was a high school girl who had ADD, but it wasn't ADHD, it was ADD. And so she sensed that I was autistic and needed help, and eventually we formed a friendship. And then there were times when there weren't a lot of people swimming at the YMCA, so I would actually meet her during her downtimes during her lifeguard shifts, and we would basically build this really amazing friendship where we just sat and talked about, our thoughts, our feelings. And then when I started telling her about some things bullies were doing and some issues, she had this amazing ability to help me understand the unspoken rules that I was breaking. And so there were times when I'd try to fit in and kids were rejecting me, and I would go to her, and she having ADD but also having the same social intuition of a neurotypical person, was able to tell me exactly what unspoken rules I violated and what I did wrong and why I had annoyed my peers. And so I just asked her, hey, can you be my social teacher? Can you teach me what those unspoken rules are that the teachers were blissfully unaware of? And so that's how that happened. And while that was going on, I also learned about, as a student, an opportunity to be a tutor at a homework club at one of the feeder elementary schools in my hometown. And that homework club was run by the parent of a girl on the swim team. And she was one of the special ed coordinators at that elementary school. It turns out that homework club was really a ruse where kids who needed special ed help, but either weren't getting detected, but were not being identified for services, this special ed coordinator, seeing these kids needed help, was basically using the homework club, which was where you could stay after school for about an hour every day to get help with your homework, to unofficially provide support for kids that the special ed department was not noticing. And her daughter was a swimmer. And so the person who I worked under, she introduced me to her daughter, and her daughter really saw really, and I clicked. And she introduced me to her friends on the swim team, and they started helping me learn the social skills. So these were the good people that I luckily happened to find. And then they took over from there. They basically were like, okay, here are the good people, here are the bad people, and here, based on your social status in the high school, here are the people to befriend, here are the people to stay away from. So you're right, autistic people do struggle knowing who's good and bad, but once I met those core good people, they took over and accurately told me who was good and who was bad. So we have time for one more question.
I'd like to add one quick comment. I know someone else on the spectrum who goes to all the football games in town here, and he's on the spectrum and he's much older than the students, but he takes with him every time a big poster that doesn't cost him much, and he makes a big sign that supports the team. And so since he's one of the few people carrying these signs, everybody knows who he is. And he has formed social connections because of these signs that he carries.
And that's amazing. And although I don't use signs, because green and gold, because the Packers are not a big thing in Illinois, and green and gold is school colors, I make friends by wearing these fancy gold and green suits. And people notice that. And it makes people feel comfortable to talk to me. And Mary, just like that person, the students love them too. And I've actually met older autistic adults at some of the other high schools that I routinely go to for away events in our athletic conference that support their schools. Like one of the neighboring schools that I go to, there's an elderly autistic adult who has his social community is supporting the school, and his dad routinely comes with him to support him and his support for the school. And I routinely sit with him and his dad, and we talk about supporting our respective schools as autistic adults.
I'd like to say something. My name is Joe Stearns. I'm a CLTS coordinator from Barron County. I also used to be an athletic director at high school. And just so you know, for the parents out there are so many jobs, volunteer jobs for kids to participate in, whether it's a manager, whether it's, I was always looking for people to help set up the football field, help coordinate. And then you get that social aspect because you're around it. You're going to start to meet more people. They might need some guidance and support, like say from an athletic director, or like James said, but there's so many things for kids and adults to do at these sporting events. It's not just, like James said, working, at behind the counter. There's taking tickets, there's, just supervision, different things like that. So just so you know that there's a lot of different things that, people can do at these sporting events.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that is important to put out there for young parents to hear as your kids are older, because I'm learning that too as our kids go into high school, that there's no shortage of opportunities to volunteer. And James, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's just so powerful to show what the power of connection can do. And, once you get out there and you're out and about, how different doors can start opening up for people and different connections can start happening and building a community. So thank you so much. I will just open it for one more quick question if James has it. Otherwise, we'll stop the recording real briefly for Tim, and then we'll resume it for Aaron. But I'll just open it up if there's one more question people want to ask, someone would like to ask.
I just want to say, Joseph, thank you for sharing that. And indeed, I often help with many of those things.
All right, going once, twice, three times. Tim, would you like to stop it? And then we'll resume for Aaron.